Today we were going to have a look at the posts and the tubes for the big site building. Unfortunately, we've missed that because we were doing other things. Andy's banged it through the workshop. It's already in the paint shop. So I'm going to show you the posts. They're fabbed prior to painting, unless they've already started that as well. But I'll show you the principles based around another job they're running through now. So what we've got is we've got the shaft drawing again, which is similar to the drawings that you've seen when we made the parts. So this is the part prior to fabrication. And what this drawing is basically all the holes, the hole centres, everything that you need to put into the post before we weld it all together with all the parts on it. So as you can see, it's got every sort of, it's got the overall length measurement. So again, a bit like the rafters, we check the overall length of the piece of steel, make sure it's the right one for the right part number. We mark it all out, we put the holes in exactly where the centres are, and in the flanges, which is this bit of the steel, they get punched with the punch machine, and in the web you can't generally fit that in there because of the way that the jaw works, so then we use a broach and we'll broach and drill through that. These are a bit different as well because they've got slotted holes, so what we'll do is we'll drill a hole either end of the slot, and then because you can't drill a slot, we'll then use the plasma cutter then to cut the difference. So that's where it starts. All the holes are put in this pen, and then basically they're took out and put to one side ready for the next available welded pen. So that's the mobile punch machine. So basically what we've got here, it's on a trolley system, it's all hydraulic, hooked up, powered up electric, and then what that is, in there basically, that's a very similar machine, just a mobile version of the machine that punches all the parts. So you have a punch and die. In the bottom of the punch you've got the nipple, so when you mark these out you'll then put a centre punch mark, you'll drop that down, which is hinged, onto the steel where you want it, and then basically you press the trigger, it'll locate, you get it exactly where you want it, and then it'll bang the steel through. And again, you'll then end up with all the little slugs like that there, and that's what pops out. So again, you've got your nipple mark there, which is where you centre punched. That's where the nipple on the bottom of the punch sits, and then it pushes it through, punches it out, and that's what you're left with, and the hole in the steel, obviously. For those of you who do not know, a mag drill or a rotor broach is this bit of kit here. So what we've got is we've got an electromagnet at the base, so that's this metal block at the bottom, and what you do is you'll put that on, you'll locate it where you want, you press the button and it magnetises against the steel, and basically you can't move it, and then it works the same as like a pillar drill. So you've got this here which then sends the drill up and down. So again, in your broach bit here in the centre you've got a centre pin, and that's sprung loaded, so you locate that on where you've knocked your centre punch mark, you locate it where you want it, you hit the magnet on, you put the guard on, and away you go. And that just works like a pillar drill, like I say. Like I say, posts, once they're punched, they'll come out and go there ready for the next welding pen. These welding tube ends up, so we'll come back and look at the tubes in a minute, and we'll look at the posts now. Albeit not the same posts as for the big site because they're already done, but I'll show you the principle of them here. So same principle again, first job, check the overall measurement. Now that has already been checked before it's come in, once it's come in, but to make sure we're constantly fabbing the right piece of steel, we double check that as the first thing. So overall measurement is checked, and then basically the same process as you saw on the rafters, we go through, we mark everything out, everything is marked from the base plate end, which is the end that sits on top of the concrete foundation when it goes to site. And everything is marked from that point up. So you've got all the, on this post for argument's sake, you've got all the sheeting rail cleats. So we refer to this building now. They're the posts or the stanchions that go up. The sheeting rails are the silver things that go from one to the other. So them cleats need welding on. Then we've got, in this building, we've got web stiffeners, which they get put in where they need to go, which supports through the rafter pressure point connections. And then we've got landing cleats. So them concrete panels that are there now, they sit on a temporary landing cleat. So it's basically a big beefy piece of angle iron that we put on the bottom that bears the weight of the panels through construction and holds them basically until you concrete the floor, which then takes the weight of all the panels. So like I say, this post, or what they're doing now, we've got all the sheeting rail cleats, we've got the landing cleats for the concrete panel, the base plate, we've got bracing cleats in here, we've got web stiffeners, and we've got a fancy sort of eaves detail with a gutter cleat as well. So there's quite a lot of fab work goes into these posts. So it looks like we're too late, they've already started painting them. So these are the stanchions. So we've got the main steel, we've got the base plate, which is a monstrous base plate obviously on this. So again, like you see when the foundations went in on site, we've got the big 6-hole end plate, base plate that's gone in, base plate that's been welded on. Then we've got all the sheeting rail cleats, all the way up the post, and then come and have a look at the far end. So then what we've got here, we've got the eaves beam plate at the top, so that sticks out to give you the projection on the eaves beam, which is the piece of steel right in the very top corner, which carries the roof sheets coming in, carries the side cladding coming up. So that's the bit that effectively both lots of your sheeting gets put onto, and also your guttering, depending on what type of guttering, but that's the area where the guttering is fixed to sometimes. And then on this building we've got the web stiffener. So the purpose of the web stiffener, where these holes are, that's where the rafter will be, which is the rafter that goes up and down, if you remember. So the 2 points in which the line of the flange of the steel come through from the rafter and from the haunch land where the web stiffeners are. And what it does is it strengthens the main stanchion up to stop any twist or deflection or any pressure where it could kink effectively that flange of steel. So it just strengthens it all up, and it adds the strength from this side through to that side. So it's just carrying it all through. We've got the holes in the web there for the eaves tie, which is the tube bracing that goes down the length of the building. Paint-wise on this, it's a bit of a different job because it's an industrial. This is intumescent painted. So this will go through, whereas normally our buildings would have one coat of semi-gloss finish high build primer. And then if the customer wants to paint it thereafter, that's fine, but generally that's plenty good enough for an agricultural building, unless they want it galvanised, obviously. But on this stuff, we have to intumescent paint it. Now, intumescent painting is for the fire regulation. So basically, we put a build-up or a number of layers of this intumescent paint, and how many layers will depend on the overall thickness that we require, which gives you the amount of time of fire resistance. So for argument's sake, if it is that building regs and the engineers expect they want a 30-minute fire resistance, that will give us X amount of microns that we need to get on in terms of the thickness of the paint covering. So we'll have to just keep painting it basically, keep putting layer on top of layer on top of layer, keep testing it, and then when we get to the right thickness for what we need, that's when we drop the colour on it over the top. So it's quite a long process to paint something like this as opposed to a normal building, but ultimately it's got to be done for the industrial purpose use. So these are the tubes for the big site shed. So obviously when I say eaves ties, which go in the web of the steel in the 4 holes, that's them ones with the square end on them, so they've got the flat plate end on them. Then you've got all your bracings, so you've got them ones there which have got the T-piece bracing on, so they're the ones I've said before go up and down in the roof or up and down in the sides. They look like they're some mez floor supports because they're a smaller size tube and only a 2-hole end plate on that one. So, but apart from that, that's all the tubes I think, pretty much for the big site shed. So again, we're back to these posts now for a different job, but the process is, like I say, they mark everything out, they'll then tack all the parts on, they then do a final check, then they'll fully weld it up, and then it will come from there into the centre of the building, and that's where it stays in like a holding pen until Andy or John, whoever's doing it, has done the final checks. Once it's all been checked through and everything we know is 100% right in the right place, away it goes to the paint shop. Now, you might think to yourself, why did you check all the way through? You've got to appreciate the volume of steel that's running through this workshop. So one building may have 40 pieces of steel on, one building may have 400 pieces of steel on. Every single piece of steel has to have its own individual identification mark. It has to be checked several times in several different ways to form part of our, what was CE marking and now UKCA accreditation. And we have to, a little bit like in the food industry in a way, you have to trace back every single element right the way through to when it was first made. So I can tell you now, if I went to a job or one of our buildings on site, as long as I can get to the piece of steel close enough to read our mark, I can trace that piece of steel all the way back through from where it is on site, right the way back to the foundry or the mill where it was first produced as an individual item. And every single part that goes onto that, I can do exactly the same with. So all the flat steel, I can trace it back through. And the same with everything we bolt on really. I can follow the paper trail all the way back with the Z purlins or the timber purlins or the roof cladding or whatever it may be. We have to be able to trace that back through to the beginning. So if you've got, for argument's sake, a particularly complicated building, some pieces of steel might only be 20mm difference or 10mm difference or 5mm difference from another. Because when the posts are made and all the drawings are done, obviously if the site has got any deviation in levels, the tops are always the same. It's only the bottom that we alter. So that's why we just check all the way through, just to make sure everything is 100% right. Because what we want is the errors found here. As soon as it goes out that door and onto that wagon and onto site, it costs the support team to put it right, because everything that we have is massive, heavy stuff. So we've got to ship something back here, or we've got to try and on-site fabricate it and weld it if there's something wrong. It's better to catch it here, which is why we go through so many rigorous checking methods. So at the moment welding tubes up, and these are the tubular bracings, side, roof, anywhere where there's that K-brace design, we use the tubes. So tubes again cropped to length, and then there's whatever connection detail the engineer specified and we've drawn, that's what's welded to the end. Welding tubes is quite difficult. It's a bit different than just a straightforward fillet weld on two bits of steel sort of put together like that. Because to get a continuous weld, you've got to roll the steel as you weld it. Something that I've never quite managed to do very well. So it's quite difficult to get the penetration into the tube as well as into the end plate, because the end plate is a thicker material, so it takes longer to heat up. Whereas the tube, you can soon blow a hole in the tube. So by the time I finish, it looks like a bit of honeycomb that's been chucked on the end of it, and a bird has sat on there for an hour or two as well. You can see now how he's rolling the steel, rolling the tube as he's welding it. One thing we do make sure we do before we start welding tubes up is we clean the trestles off, because all the welding sparks and the bobbles of weld land on the trestles when we're welding other things, and as you can imagine, when you're rolling a tube you want it perfectly smooth to do so, and the worst thing in the world is as you're welding you hit a bobble on the trestle and it stops you, and then all of a sudden you're very stop-start. So we make sure we clean the trestles down, then we weld the tubes up. Tube ends are welded over in the corner. We've got a special bay if they're generally there's a fairly standardish part for a tube end for a painted building and a tube end for a galvanised building. We'll come back to why in a later video, but in a nutshell, if you're galvanising anything, it has to be vented so it doesn't explode. So we'll come back to that when we do a galvanising video later on. So there we go, that's the posts, or the stanchions and the tubes for the big site shed. I'll leave you guys with a post and tube montage, and I'm going to go back to the office, but if you like what you've seen, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.